Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Hello everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we are continuing our near-death experience week. Before we jump into that, I do have something that I want to say. This, you may have recalled, we had a podcast with a gentleman by the name of Terry Acosta. It was on Native American cryptids. He had amazing stories there. Actually, I had noticed one day that he had submitted several very interesting stories, and it led me to contact him to, get him on the show, and he did, and he even had news stories for the show, and still one of my personal favorites. And I had learned today that Terry had just passed away. And he was an avid listener, great fan, and I'm saddened to hear it. And I'd just like to, basically say that we are dedicating this episode to Terry. And if any of you have any, well wishes or thoughts, you can drop them in the comments, or just direct good vibrations towards his family. And And with that said, we'll just jump into the podcast from here. So this is on near-death experiences, and this particular episode is more on the elements of a near-death experience, what it consists of, commonalities and parallels that all people from all walks of life seem to experience. And the second part is going to be stories. In fact, there's two that I found that I wanted to share that were very interesting, very harrowing, and the third one is a user submitted story that just came into me last night. So this episode is all on the elements of a near-death experience, and part 2 will be 3 stories of near-death experiences, and that will conclude our near-death experience week. So let's start with one of the common questions that people have regarding near-death experiences, and that is what the point of life is. I mean, that's one of the questions everybody has. I mean, one of the ones that when people have near-death experiences, they hope to find out. And sometimes they have a guide or a dead relative or someone who explains these things to them. And to put it bluntly, the point of life is said to be solely for the sake of soul growth. Nothing more, nothing less. Earth is a tough place, but it's tough on purpose. It's a boot camp. We come down here, we suffer, and in doing so, we learn new perspectives. And the whole concept is that, as we've spoken in other podcasts during this week, our body is kind of like a prison. It's a filter. It filters out our past memories, our past everything. So we come down here fresh, and when we do that, in only doing that, can we experience life without these biases and just really get a perspective on things. Like, for example, to learn what it's like to be someone who suffers through cancer. It's not enough for us to read about it. I've read about it. Anyone who hasn't had cancer has read about it. We know it's a terrible thing, but it's different than being someone who goes through it. So only can you get the exact perspective by experiencing it. And the whole idea, of course, our body being a prison, is that we speed up the process of soul growth, because they do say that you can grow your soul to a degree on the other side, but it takes much longer. So they explain the whole point of coming here as a great way to speed up that process. And by, as we grow spiritually, we can access different areas. Like they say, like there isn't two spots. There's not just heaven and hell like so many people think. There's many, many tiers and shades of in between. And just like all the physical properties in the world, our spirit vibrates at a certain frequency. And you may have heard people refer to negative entities as a lower vibrational frequency, and higher vibrational beings vibrating at a higher frequency. And you can only exist in a realm that is similar to your vibrational frequency. So if you're a negative person, when you die, you essentially go to a more negative place that's more in tune to your vibrational frequency. If you're a good person, you go the opposite way. So the idea is that we come here in hopes to advance ourselves, so that when we do pass on, we can access those better places. And of course, the higher we go, the more positive it is, so we feel better. It's a more loving place. It's a more knowledgeable place. So that's what we strive to do, and essentially what the goal is here, at least as far as I could tell from everything that I've read. The next thing that people mention is choice of life and hardships. And what it is that many people who have come back from near-death experiences report that they had actually chosen specific parts about their life before coming here. They describe each life as a mission with specific goals in mind. Some of the things that we supposedly get to choose is who our birth parents will be, what our overall goal in life is going to be. For example, somebody who wants to learn to be humble might choose the life of a beggar. In fact, we even get to choose, how we die, when we die. And if true, I really hope that I pick to die asleep in my bed.
And when it comes to this, of course I have trouble believing in any one thing, right? I mean, I definitely believe that all these things are possible, but regardless, I just I take it all in, and what it is will be, basically. But this isn't something that we just hear from experiencers of near death. We also see it or hear these same lines coming out of hypnotic regression. People regress so far back that they're start recounting their birth, and then they're regressed even further to before their birth. And I'm sure the first few hypnotic regressors who stumbled upon this were like, what the hell, and just kind of rolled with it. And I mean, that's kind of the first story I ever read of was supposedly one of the first hypnotic regressions, like recorded ones, that went back before that. And the regressor was, dumbfounded that this person, was regressing back before birth. And this is kind of the same, story that we get from these pre-birth hypnotic regressions. You tend to pick your family, you tend to pick your friends, and generally speaking, through the multiple lives, your multiple incarnations, you know, you kind of stick with a certain crew, you know, and in one life, you know, it's your best friend. In the next life, you know, your best friend's your brother. In your next life, you know, that your brother best friend becomes you know, a close teacher or something, you know. So you end up playing these different roles in each other's lives, and you know, it seems to not just be an individual quest, but also, you know, a group journey as well, to a degree. And that, you know, from time to time, new characters are added to the narrative, if you know, to use the illusion.
I've read that same thing. You know, the whole group of the people that you know, you're always with them in different capacities and different lives.
Yeah, so everybody's playing a different part, and you know, so you know, it's not just it appears to not just be a solo venture. I mean, if this theory is correct, and I mean, all we have to go off of in you know, in this stuff is, you know, anecdotal evidence, you know, just stories, tales that people tell. But I mean, that's how we got to where we are, right? I mean, we're storytelling creatures. You know, we've only been recording stuff down on paper and empirically for a very short period of time, and
well, you know, I
can't prove everything, right?
The beautiful thing about this is that you know, and even what I have here, it's not like one person's belief. And I'm kind of like you. I kind of allow for multiple different possibilities, but this is the general, I guess, when thousands and thousands and thousands of stories are put together, this is the general belief system that comes from it, you know, the composite of all those experiences. And, you know, I'm kind of like you in that, again, like I don't know what actually happens, but many of these elements, you know, and not just one place. I mean, there's a lot of nonprofit scientific sites that have been cataloging thousands of these experiences and just looking for the, you know, average story, you know, what makes sense. I mean, obviously there's not many stories like the Urbis one that we did yesterday. Yeah. But, you know,
well, I guess it depends on how big your sample is, you know, because like I mentioned yesterday, it did put me in mind of some of the, you know, like the ancient Egyptian tales of journeys through the underworld. You know, you read that stuff and you're like, wow, what a crazy acid trip these guys were on.
Well, you know? You could also look at it like, you know, some people speak of, you know, our, you know, multiple lives. I mean, most people would say that you don't even, you know, you might do Earth once and then you move to the next tier. It's not common that souls will do the same planet, same, you know, idea.
That's a common one,
right?
And you know, I guess we always have to leave open for the possibility. And you know, even though there's these pretty large samples of stories that we can kind of take the general themes from, and you know, create a narrative that way. You know, there's those individuals out there, and I mean, I'm not a huge proponent of this theory, but you know, again, anything's possible. The idea that there is an advanced intelligence forcing us into reincarnation over and over and over again.
Oh, the Archon thing.
Well, yeah, there's the Archons, and the whole idea that they're, you know, we're not able to really ascend. They're causing the amnesia, so we don't remember anything, and we just make all the same mistakes over and over and over again. You know, some people do better the second, third, or 300th time, but regardless, you know, the fact that we can't leave means that, you know, a lot of this negative energy is created, because we're not able to remember any of the lessons from one to the next. So how do you grow? You know, I've seen that argument made that, you know, what sense does it make to forget everything from life to life? Because, you know, your super self has the information, but you know, your super self isn't down here. It's this amnesic blank slate that unless through some fluke of actions and beliefs, nature and nurture, you grow up to be a relatively well-adjusted person.
Well, maybe the idea is if they make you, they put you in such a terrible place, whether you want to call that society or just what our world's become, and you're just the right vibrational frequency of mediocre, we'll say, perhaps you do come back to Earth to repeat the whole process, and they can feed off of it and ad nauseum if they could, but
ad infinitum, ad nauseum. Yeah.
But of course,
I always like to point out, though, when it comes to, we think of things, we're like, it ain't so bad here. We're comfortable and, but now most of you listening to this are in North America, United States, Canada. We have European and Australian listeners as well. Mostly from developed, relatively peaceful nations. The majority of the world lives in abject fucking poverty, and large sections of it are constantly plagued by war and plagues, disease and famine. And here, you look out the window and listen, it's crickets. Other parts of the world, it's just the constant rattle of gunfire and all that jazz, right? So, we're very lucky to be where we are for sure. But I can't help but think whenever I come across that theory, it's not something that I research all the time, but whenever I come across somebody spouting off about that theory, that's what it always puts me in the mind of, because at first, when you first think of it, you're like, well, it's not that negative here. But then, you got to look at the planet as a whole. The largest population centers on the planet suffer some of the worst conditions. And
we all have apparently different, objectives, and we've all apparently picked different lives. Like, and I've heard that, people who have harder lives are thus rewarded higher on the other end, right? They're taking on a bigger adventure, and thus the gains have to balance out, to equal measure, right? And, the other thing we're meant to learn here, and I've heard this as well, we have a hard time getting along with people our same race, color, and religion, let alone, people of different race and religion and stuff. And then, on the other side, we're supposed to be able to get along with other creatures from different planets, alien creatures. Like, how can we manage that if we can't even get along with our own kind, right? So part of the lesson here is also to be put into, to have a variety of people and to learn to live with people who are different and just get into that harmonized relationship, because, in the upper tiers of I guess the better realms, that's expected of you, apparently. And I'm just saying this from like what I've read, but it makes sense, right? And so, that's something that we have to work on here.
So would that be an idea like, here on the material realm, all these different species are, all these different intelligent species are separated by planets, and, an almost insurmountable amount of unsurvivable distance. And then in the higher realms, every there's no separate planets. Everyone's mixed.
That's the idea. In fact, they also say that, like how you mentioned before, like how we travel through lives in groups, right? Well, I've heard near-death experiences where someone had been there and looking at their life review and what's going to happen if they don't go back and stuff. And one of them had like a kid, and she saw what was going to happen to this kid, or her kid, if she didn't go back. And if she didn't go back, he wasn't going to be able to complete his mission here on Earth, and she got to feel the emotion that he had about not being able to complete that, and just the really, really deep depression. And because life is a gift, right? Like, it's a very precious, rare gift. You probably don't get a whole lot of chances, and he was going to not be able to succeed in his mission here had she stayed there, because you're always given a choice. Do you want to go back or stay? Well, not always, but you often,
unless you're decapitated.
But often you hear of people getting a choice, and she almost all people want to stay initially, and once she was, they're always showing like what's going to happen if they don't. And in her case, when she saw that, she just had to come back. She felt so guilty. And the whole idea being that, like, we do have a mission here, but it's not just on us. Like, sometimes there's other people with us in that mission that play a part in whether or not we're going to have, whether we're going to succeed. Like, for example, let's just say, Ryan, that I came across you, and I didn't know you. You were a stranger. You were in a cafe somewhere. You were really down on your luck, and you were contemplating suicide or something like that. And I'm a stranger, and I walk in, and somehow we get to talking. And maybe I just give you a short little spiel about something that just changes your perspective and stops you from committing suicide, or changes your whole outlook. And then you go on, and maybe you were going to become a doctor, and you were going to save somebody, and that was your mission. And then that doctor was going to do something like create some new cure for some disease or something. So like all these things can be interlinked, right? So when one person fails, sometimes a lot of people fail. And the impression that I got from reading a lot of these stories is that on the other side, we all have this giant grand goal. We all have our individual missions, but it's all towards one giant goal as a whole for all of us, as just spiritual energy itself. We're all connected. We're all one, and that's the impression that I came away from after reading all this stuff. So on the other side, people, they do care for one another. Almost like it's yourself, because we're all one entity in some ways. So that's something that I've read a bit about. And again, we're always trying to rise higher in this other realm, and of course we can only advance by going forwards, not backwards, right? So it's an interesting, it's a hard thing to get your head around, because there's just so many different, how many people just believe that when you die, if you're good, you go to heaven, and you have 50 virgins and a hot tub and some wine and some figs or something, and if you're bad, you're burned alive and filleted eternally. Like that's really extreme ends, right?
Yeah,
and let's face it, if you live a relatively good life, and all you do is like you go to church, you pay your bills, and whatever. Is that really worthy of 50 virgins? And right? Like, it doesn't really seem to make sense. Everything else in life is in cycles, and there's a progression curve. I don't see why this would be any different.
I always, really enjoy thinking about Howard Storm's take, or his version of it, from what he took away, when the idea that it, like you said, is rare for us to come back. I don't know if I want to come back here again.
Me either. But we got to make some changes. If we're gonna get off this rock.
Yeah, and I wonder, then the idea that if you do screw up real bad, and I guess it's a philosophical conversation as it is. You screw up real bad, and you end up backtracking. Well, what does that mean exactly? If you're essentially banishing yourself to a lower vibrational realm, is this, is it a place where lessons could even be learned. You know, I mean,
Well,
if the place is crawling with shadowy demon-like beings, you know, you're not gonna have much time to worry about learning lessons as you're scrabbling in the dark trying to get away from evil creatures.
That's a good point. And actually, there's something I got to say to that, because that very same question was posed in something I was reading. And someone said, basically, you don't have time to change when you're down there because you're too busy being tortured and just wrapped up in the negative experience. But on the other hand, I have read that you can make progress down there. It's just really slow. And the way I'd compare it to is thought patterns. Except that you know it's hard to think. Like, you can imagine if you were in a really busy hustle bustle of something, it's hard to concentrate and think, right? Well, if you have everybody has thought patterns, right? Most of us are somewhere in the middle. There's some people who are really positive, and it doesn't matter what's happening, you know, they can put a positive spin on it and they feel great. And then there's people who have really negative thought patterns, and it's really hard to break out of it. And that's why a lot of people who are depressed go to counseling and things like that, because, you know, your thought pattern tends to repeat, and that's why they call it the pattern. So the way you think, regardless of what's happening, if you're not consciously making a real strong effort, you fall into the same way of thinking. And if it's a negative way, well, it's going to be really hard to get out of. It's like training, you know.
Well, that's because you literally build chemical pathways in
exactly.
your brain. And your brain's going to follow those pathways over and over and over again unless you build new ones.
Exactly. And so it's, you know, it's work. It's a lot of work. You have to work on yourself. So in the spiritual realm, you're vibrating at a particular frequency. So that's naturally how you think. And on top of that, you're going to be in a place surrounded by people like you. So if you're in a place where everybody is negative, emotion is contagious, right?
Oh yeah.
So you're in a place where everybody's negative, you're being tortured, you're being like, it's hard. And I guess that's why it would be so hard to progress. But they have said that the option is there. And in fact, even in hell and in the void realms, there are what they call light beings around it, that if you call out for help and it's genuine and they feel you're ready, they will come down and help. Now in the void, that's more so, you know, they'll take you out of there because that's supposed to be a self-reflection spot, and we'll get to that soon. But I'm not sure exactly what it means in hell, but I have read that you can get out of there, and the only one holding you there is yourself. Like, you know, hell is your own thought patterns, right? So if you're a really nasty, negative person, then you're manifesting you're manifesting your world around you, and that's what you're gonna.
So what dreams may come style.
Yeah, essentially. So So now let's jump on to karma, because that's another thing that people talk about. And within regards to roles, you know, there's something to be said for karma. Now this was from a story revealed by Edgar Cayce. This is the one that, well, not the same one, but I mentioned him in our last podcast. Anyway, he had trained himself to have outer-body experiences. And in his experiences, he could travel down a tunnel of light, which he referred to as the Hall of Records in heaven. And anyway, one day there was a woman who was about to have this really risky operation. And she went to Cayce for advice on whether or not she should have this procedure. So Cayce went and he had one of these outer-body experiences, and he consulted the Hall of Records. He came back with what he found, and he told her that she should have it. And the reason being that in a previous life, the woman and the doctors who were going to perform this operation for her, you know, she had actually, you know, they owed her one. Basically, in a previous life, there was a confrontation where these doctors in the present life, in the last life, they had actually, they were inquisitors, and they tortured and killed this woman for being a heretic. And in this current life, you know, it was the doctors, like, for redemption, they were meant to save her life, you know, to pay back this karmic debt. So the woman took the advice, and the surgery actually worked out perfectly. Right, just as Edgar Cayce had predicted. So that, you know, that's an interesting thing. The Hall of Records is something that's been mentioned by a couple of people. In fact, another thing about the Hall of Records is that, say you're an atheist, right? And I don't even believe that all atheists go to hell. I mean, I think if you're a good person, I don't think it matters anyway. You're going to go to where your vibrational, frequency is most catered to. And anyway, there's lots of people, a lot of these stories come from people who have a near-death experience and are given tours, right? Like, this is where the suicides go, this is where these people go, this is where the atheists go. And that's essentially where this story came from. But I can't remember if it was a man or woman, but they were given a tour, and there were all these atheists who were in this great library. There was all kinds of knowledge, like everybody was studying constantly, and the idea being that they weren't spiritually evolved enough yet for God, but they were on the path of enlightenment, and they were doing everything they could to further advance themselves, and that's the stage that they were at. So they weren't in a bad place, but they were, even on the other side, they were further trying to advance themselves. So, that's another case mentioning the Hall of Records.
Yeah. See, this is where parts of these experiences kind of break down for me, because I have a serious problem with the idea that because I don't believe in, what is essentially a fairy tale, because there's no, it's as believable and as unbelievable as any other kind of myth you've ever heard. I mean, we look at some of the world religions, like, the Egyptian religion or the Roman religions. We look at that as being mythology now, but once upon a time that was profound truth, and their inquisitors were burning their heretics at the stake.
But remember now, these people having these experiences, they could very well be having an experience based on their belief system, because it's their brain.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Is that whenever the near-death experience kind of it starts getting into God and Jesus, I really get bothered by it, because like, what is hell full of Neanderthals? Is it just chock to the brim with people from 4,000 years ago? Like, everyone from 2001 years ago and before, right up to the first man, is in hell, because there's Christianity only popped up 2,000 years ago, and the human race has been around for 200,000.
Well, as long as we're venting our frustrations, I'm gonna tell you one right now that I think you're gonna be on the same page as me with. Probably a lot of people. One of the things that, and this came out, I was talking to somebody in the comments about it today, and it really, really bothers me, and that is, I got nothing against Christianity per se. What I do have a problem with is, and it's not every Christian, there's lots of good people, but unfortunately there's some fairly loud ones who are very judgmental, and it's never live and let live, right? It's like, you believe exactly what we say, exactly how we want you to say, believe in it, or you're going to hell. And there's never any like middle ground. It's like, oh yeah, we love you as long as you're exactly like us. Otherwise, you're going to hell, right?
Yeah, and it's not just and this is where it gets even more bizarre, right? It's you go to heaven if you're a Christian. Well, it's not just that. You only go to heaven, like a Catholic will say only a Catholic can go to heaven. All the Protestants are fucking Satan worshipers, right? And I mean, you have how many branches of Christianity?
Well, Ryan, I'm going to tell you exactly how far this goes, and you know what? If you're one of these fucking Christians, you're going to hell. You
heard it here first, folks.
You heard it. Well, just listen to me now, and you'll agree. If you're sane, you will agree. So one of the things that Christians bring up or anyone in religion about cults is that they use fear tactics, right? They scare you into their cult, right? For one thing, threatening people with hell all the time, that's fucking the same thing. That's threatening people to fear. It's like, oh yeah, you're welcome to come here, but if you're not exactly like that, you're going to burn in hell over and over, and your fucking face will melt off. And anyway,
he's all loving and all forgiving. But
that's exactly what cults do, number one. Yeah. Number two, I came across this story, and I mean, even for me, it was graphic, okay? And it was basically told from 15 different witnesses that had witnessed, ironically, they were given a tour of hell. Yeah, let's bring Christians down for a tour of hell, right? Anyway, so it was 15 different witnesses. It was obviously a religious-centric site. And, it was very long, very graphic about different people being tortured. And they would reveal, they would say, okay, well, this witness asked Jesus. They were given a tour by Jesus in hell, and they were asking him, well, why is this guy here and such and such. Anyway, there was one there, and the guy who was being tortured, he was like in some, I think it was like hung upside down inside a lava pit, and he kept getting dipped in. They would watch his face melt off, and it would grow back, and it would just keep happening. And they asked Jesus, what he was here for or something. And it was like, well, he was a religious man. He lived good. He followed all the rules, but he didn't give any money to the collection plate. And therefore, God requires that to build his churches so that people can learn of them or something like that. And I was like, are you fucked? Like, I'm sorry, but if that's your fucking God, I want no part of it, right? I mean, honestly, if you'd fucking put someone down there for eternity to fucking be tortured because they didn't give their fucking money in a church, like, are you kidding? Like, that makes me mad.
It's like God's a mob boss. If you don't pay your extortion, well,
that's exactly it. And
the lava boots for you.
And some woman was mentioning it, and she said, it's just like the bully at school for your lunch money, right? It's like, oh yeah, as long as you give me your lunch money, I won't pick on you or beat you up. But fuck, what is that? Like, right? They say that your God is supposed to be like a father to you, like you're his children. Well, would you let your children suffer because they didn't give you a couple bucks? Or even if they did something wrong, like, you don't torture them. What do? You ground them, maybe. You don't torture them. So, like, I have a huge problem with that. And if you're a Christian who's going around and basically making up this bullshit, because that's what it is. It's bullshit. I mean, people like Howard Storm have went there. There's been tons of atheists who have gone and went to a good place. It's bullshit. It's scare tactics, and it's exactly what cults do. They're no better. In fact, they're worse because they're hypocritical. You're supposed to be welcoming and loving people, and I mean, that's what they preach. And then these certain individuals go out, and you know what? Unfortunately, it makes the whole religion look bad. And that's,
well, here's the real unfortunate part, though, is that I don't want this to come off at all as a Christian bashing podcast, because it really isn't. I mean, we're just talking about the different issues that are connected.
It's not Christianity. It's certain people.
The problem is, though, is that a lot of these beliefs are what is preached. That is what's in the book in a lot of cases, right? I mean, it's if you fool with spirits or necromancy, hell. If you do this, hell. If you do that, hell. I mean, it's written right in there. So, I mean, on one hand, for you and me, it'd be common sense to say, well, if you're preaching that he's all loving and all forgiving and blah, 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 then you got to be able to reason out that this is bullshit. But, let's face it, a lot of these people have been indoctrinated with this from birth, from their holy book that states a lot of these things categorically. Maybe not in the graphic detail that was on that website, but it more or less paints that exact picture. Well, now, I don't believe that any more than you do, but unfortunately, that's what's in the official handbook.
Well, here's the thing, though, and I was speaking to somebody. Actually, somebody wrote to me the other day and said that it was obvious that we didn't know anything about the Bible based on what we get that, right? We're gonna get that because we're not definitely not of a popular opinion. But anyway, I went and I pointed out a couple things, and you can Google this if you like, but there are several stories, in particular from the Garden of Eden times, that in the like as they are in the Bible now, were actually translated from old stories that were, it was like 2500 BC in like I think it was Egypt and somewhere else, that were buried. They found them in these capsules, and it was artwork.
Well, like the Noah's Ark stories coming out of the, you know, they found it on the Sumerian cuneiform tablets from thousands of years before it was ever written in the Bible.
Well, here's the interesting thing, is that a lot of these stories were translated by people's, you know, the people who were translating, what they had to work with was artworks. It was a picture. So they had to look at a picture and try to determine what this meant. And they came up with stories. One story is not going to be a very accurate, you know, translation anyway. I mean, can you look at a picture and tell me exactly what that means? You know, from symbology, from a lost language from 2,500 years ago. So
a picture that was drawn by a culture that was dead before your great grandfather was ever born.
Exactly. So the thing to take away from this is that the Bible, all of these different religious scriptures, they are the translations and the beliefs and the biasness of that culture of that time. So when you're looking at the Bible, you're looking at what mankind thought of it 2,500 years ago from a bad translation, from several pictures and their belief systems, their culture, their biases. I mean, back then they were crucifying people. They, you know, like look at the Middle Ages and how people acted then. I mean, these are the mindsets that, you know, were some people follow to the letter today. I like to think that we advanced a little bit since then, right? So you have to look at it like, I do believe that there are grains of truth in there for sure. But
yeah, definitely.
But I also think that, you know,
that goes for all world mythology.
Exactly. Everything, all religion, all stories, all society, all culture. I think everything has nuggets of truth in it. And, you know, for us to know, I mean, we're really meant to go and learn it. Like nothing in life is easy. Why should it be so easy as to say, well, I'm going to go to church every Sunday. I'll let them spoon feed me exactly the interpretation that they have of this book, and if I believe it 100%, then I'm golden, I'm safe, right? I mean, nothing else in life is that simple. Why would the most important thing, your spirituality, be that simple?
Yeah, and by all accounts, from what, you know, we're talking about here today, it's really not. You know, it's a complex system of recycling and interconnection and, you know, reworking, do-overs, you know, new tests, new, you know, that paradise will not be so easily achieved.
No.
There are greater tests to be passed. And
just to clarify again, like I have no problems with Christianity or anything like that. I just find it really offensive when people go out and purposely throw scare tactics like that at people who are probably only looking there because they're scared in the first place and they're trying to find some kind of security or some kind of hope or whatever, and they go there and find these basically threats. That's what it feels like to me, is a threat, right? I mean, it's really nasty is what I think. But anyway, moving on from that, because this has already gotten pretty polarizing, I think.
Yeah. Thankfully, I think that attitude, just to sound off on that whole thing, thankfully, I think a lot of those attitudes are merely holdovers from an older time. I mean, a lot of I work with quite a few religious individuals and from several different religions, and we all get along just fine. With a very much, thankfully, a very much live and let live, you know, attitude. When you have a Christian, a Muslim, and an atheist that can stand around and you know, every lunch hour and have perfectly normal conversations, even about religion, you know, I find it quite refreshing. It gives me hope.
Well, I mean, truthfully, I've never met a person in person that was like that. I've only ever encountered them on the internet. But I mean, I've talked to priests who I can get along with perfectly. Like I do believe in God. Like, I know, Ryan, I'm not going to ask you to go there, but I do, and I believe in Jesus, and I believe in religion. But I have my own kind of built system based around everything. It's not like I don't say I'm a Catholic and I'm just everything in this religion. Like, I'm a composite of the lens of my experience and right.
Spiritualism is a very individual thing, and I think that's reflected in the. I mean, just look at the NDE stories that you've graced us with so far. I mean, each of them have a different spin on. Some people are walking down a hallway. Some people see the tunnel of light. There's a different. There's not just one go on it.
Exactly. So moving on from that spot. Next thing we're going to speak of is the silver cord. We did actually, we covered that already in a previous episode. Basically, it's just, we have an umbilical cord, goes from the physical body to, your mother for sustenance. Well, your spiritual body has one as well. Goes from your forehead of your spiritual body to your physical body. They say if it breaks, you're gone. It's like if you have an outer body experience, people report to have seen their silver cord. It basically keeps you bound a certain distance from your body so that you can't explore the far reaches of the other realm unless you're absolutely over there. You're ready. It's like a safety mechanism. So that's the silver cord. But one thing we didn't discuss very much, and is very much an important aspect of, very common aspect of the afterlife, is the void. And the void is something you'll see mentioned time and time again in near-death experiences. Anytime somebody says they're in complete blackness or they can't see anybody, it's just darkness, that's the void. And what the void is, well, actually, let's just talk about the fact that not everybody goes there. Some people most people get dumped into the void when they die, but some people just skip it altogether and head to the next stage, which usually features like a dead relative or someone they know. It could be God, it could be Jesus, some
sort of guide. I actually know somebody very, very close to me who experienced the void.
Okay, yeah, I do. I know who you're talking about. I'm not going to say her name, but I know who you're talking about. So the thing, why do they call it the void? What is it about? Well, the void is exactly what it sounds like. It's a realm of complete darkness and emptiness where the only thing that exists is a person's thoughts and emotions. It is devoid of love and light, and the only love and light that can exist there is the love and light that exists within you. So it's basically the perfect setup for self-reflection, and this can be considered a beautiful or terrifying experience depending on the person that goes there. What are you like on the inside, right? What's your thought patterns? What's your memories? Your ego is stripped away, and you see yourself for the first time as your true self through unbiased eyes. Essentially, you judge yourself. So, when you first go to the void, you apparently travel there to and from the void via a tunnel, and that's when people speak of like a tunnel of light. Well, you get there, it's all black, but they all mention going through this tunnel. And some people just call it, like they say they feel like they've been falling, like they have this falling feeling. The time spent in the void really depends on the individual, because the whole point of the void is to reflect on oneself. So only when a soul is ready can it move on. So if you have a strong attachment to earthly desires, or are afraid to show yourself in the light, afraid for people to see what you are, this wait can seem like forever. And these types of souls just tend to, they get stuck there and they torture themselves, mentally. Well, you don't have a brain, but it's the same thing. You think and you kind of, you swim in your thoughts. And some of these souls are said to, if they stick there, if they're stuck there and they're in torment, they're said to sometimes reincarnate rather than move on so that they can try again. It's like they didn't do well enough. And they're said to be loving beings of light, and this is what I was referencing earlier, that are willing to help, but they surround the area, but you can't see them. Like, you have to ask for their help, and this help cannot be forced upon anyone who doesn't want it. So you have to want to be helped. Many such people have asked for help because they are terrified in the void, and either one of these light beings, God or Jesus, will come and then whisk them away. And then step 2 begins, where you have that guide who gives you a tour and explains to you all the what life is, what death is, any questions you have, that kind of thing. They generally get a Q&A with whoever it is that they meet up with. So some people go to the void, some people completely skip over it, but the void seems to be.
I guess if you're you're kind of riding the rails in terms of neutrality. What a perfect place to go and reflect and polarize yourself either one way or the other. That's be a place where if there is a total reduction of ego, and you're kind of bared naked to yourself, and you're in this situation where you have no choice but to face your decisions, and it'd be pretty easy to come to a conclusion after a time of just who you were. And that kind of a situation is probably what either what, I am a good guy, whoop, and you're on your way, or
at least accepting who you are, and realizing what you've done, good or bad, just accepting with an unbiased view what you've accomplished, and you know what I mean, like just coming to terms with it. So that's the void. Another aspect I think it's important to bring up is actually hell, because what hell is, from like every example that I've read, aside from these super Christian examples that I mentioned earlier, almost all of these hell examples are the same in what they say it is, and that is that you do it to yourself. So you'll read a lot of these stories where what they describe hell as is different. It's kind of unique to the individual, not unlike everything else. Some you're going to hear of pits of fire with the tormenting of beasts, but you also read a lot of stories that refer to hell as a state of mind. Basically, your own inner thoughts are manifested. It's kind of like the void, except in the void, you don't actually manifest anything. You just feel your emotions. I guess the next realm, you actually start to manifest all of these things that are in your head. So if all your thoughts are of the negative variety, then that's what you're going to manifest. You're going to manifest hate, torture, anger, depression, all of those mental hang-ups like fear, guilt, rage, regret, earthly addictions. They manifest a terrible place for you, but essentially you do it, and you can't see through it to see the light. You can't get past these hang-ups that you have.
So a lot of those traditional kind of ideas and images of hell being the result of people suffering extreme forms of guilt and feeling that I deserve to be dipped in fire.
Yeah, like in fact, if you believe that that's what hell is, and you come to terms and believe that you're a terrible person,
I deserve this. There
you'll probably manifest the worst things that you can possibly imagine, and that's where you're gonna stay, right? That's your thought pattern. That's your, where you believe you belong. And I guess once the filter comes off, you're gonna have a much more, I guess, accurate idea of where you believe you belong, right? So the other aspect is that they say nobody is keeping you there. You're not locked up. You're free to leave whenever you want, but you have to work through your issues, and that can be a long process because, like I said, when you're surrounded by negativity and you believe it, or you're so hung up, it's hard to change your thought patterns. It's hard to, that's hard on earth. I can only imagine over there. In fact, there's people who have been given a tour of various hell realms and have, been given the explanation that these souls are free to leave whenever they want, but they just feel so guilty about the things that they've done, or they just feel so miserable that they won't let themselves leave. You know, they don't feel that they deserve it. And then there are those, now this is a separate hell, right? For people who suffer from drug and alcohol addictions, and they're basically stuck in kind of like a limbo state. They're so attached to their earthly desires that some of them actually stay on Earth. People have reported, you know, visiting Earth in their near-death experience, like Vegas, and seeing all these ghosts hanging around people, having cigarettes and drinks, and constantly reaching towards them, trying to, you know, grasp it, and their hands just going right through them. They're miserable. They want so badly.
Well, that would be my ultimate version of hell.
Well, you know, you wouldn't be the only one. I mean, how many people are addicted to various things, right? So depending on how strong those addictions are, you know, they're saying that it's possible that you could be anchored to your earthly addictions and you just can't shake it. And that's a form of hell. And then, you know, there's different variations, right? Like there's bad to worse, right? There's, you know, a low vibrational place, and, you know, many shades and slower vibrations below that. And, you know, the worse the place is, the slower it vibrates, and vice versa for positive places. So, you know, as I mentioned before, you know, we tend to flock or be pulled or drawn. We don't actually have a choice. We're brought to where we most best match up with, right?
And like, to me, it's such a beautiful framework, you know. The whole idea, like you look at any of the religions on planet Earth over the last few thousand years, you know, they all have these very anthropomorphized settings. You know, hell is like the worst kind of torture chamber. Heaven is this, you know, beautiful, never-ending symphony in an idyllic paradise. You know, which is all very anthropomorphized. You know, it's our ideal or worst situations that we can imagine here on Earth taken to a divine degree. You know, but the gradient system where you have all these, you know, different conscious energy forms kind of filtering themselves out on these different levels based on a sliding scale of vibration. I mean, that seems like a very natural, you know, nature works like that in so many ways. You know, when you're looking at, you know, just any kind of a medium, you know, you pour a bunch of different types of sand into a jar of water and stir it up, and you let it, you know, just let it sort itself out. You know, you'll see these very defined different layers as everything settles at different rates and kind of separates itself to where, you know, and there seems to be a very natural process in this whole theory of the afterlife where, and I, you know, that seems like a very beautiful thing. It's almost scientific. You know, and it makes sense. It's a logical structure for such a system, you know, and it also offers real consequences for your actions. You know, it's like, well, if you live in a negative state of mind, doing, you know, negative things and bringing more negativity into the world, you know, that's where you're going to be drawn to when you pass into the next reality. And that doesn't mean that you're stuck there forever. It just, how far down determines how, you know, how long it's going to take you to kind of work through your shit, as it were. You know, maybe the higher ups can do it in 10 or 15 Earth years, and people further down take a few thousand to kind of figure it up and work their way up the ladder, as it were. So you know, you're never stuck. You're never, you know, but there are true consequences, and it all revolves around, you know, learning lessons and you know, moving yourself up that vibrational ladder. And it seems like such an elegant system, I guess, that, you know, it's one of the few, you know, I always say that I believe in nothing, but I allow for the existence of everything. You know, it's one of the few things that, though I can never bring myself to say I believe that that's the way it is, that I feel strongly that's a good contender. You know,
me
because
too.
it is so elegant.
Yep. It sounds right. Like, I mean, if we look at everything that we know on Earth and how it works and how systems work, I mean, where plants decide to grow, where animals decide to live, where, I mean, everything just has this natural state where they settle. And it just makes sense that, you know, our spirit would do the same thing, right? It would just be drawn that way. And, of course, the very last thing on my list to check off here with this podcast, only a little small note, but it's on time. You know, you just mentioned how you could have 50, it could be 15 Earth years, it could be 20, it could be 100, it could be 1,000, and it could certainly feel that way. But time is said to lose all meaning in the spiritual realm, and this comes from like practically every near-death experience. But they say like the past, the present, the future exist all at once, and spirits can jump to any notch in that timeline when they wish. You know, and you will just hear this explained like it's somehow you're able to be in the past, the present, and the future all at the same time. Like everything is accessible, everything is possible, and it's a hard thing for us to get our heads around, especially because for us everything is cycled, it's linear.
Well, yeah, we're stuck in a stream of time moving ever forward, but you know, all of existence, at least, you know, the material realm, you know, it might exist as one vast cloud, you know, and it's something that can be, if you have access to higher dimensions of time, would be accessible at any point from the big bang until the big freeze or whatever the hell happens at the end of the material universe. And you know, it's such an interesting philosophical and scientific question and spiritual question, the idea of time. You know, I mean, obviously there must be some sort of passage of time or understanding of time, you know, because if not, then why would our super selves, as it were, be interested in coming down here and learning lessons faster?
Well, exactly, right? I guess time is such a, you know, even if time doesn't exist, it must take a really long time to progress.
Yeah.
If you're not, and I guess the whole idea is that when you're in this body, you know, all of your thoughts and memories and biasness is gone. So you learn from a fresh perspective, and I guess that just makes all the difference, right?
The other implication of this idea, I mean, if it is true, that it means at every point of existence, everything that's ever existed since the Big Bang until the end of this particular universe, all exists as one single experience. It's like one enormous 3-dimensional painting that has every, you know, nanosecond, every picosecond from the Big Bang until the end of time painted into it.
Must be one hell of a hard drive that stores that.
Well, you know, and that'll be a future podcast, the holographic universe. Yeah. You know, but if it is accessible by these upper, you know, by higher vibrational beings or beings that are able to access multi-dimensional time, then, I mean, you know, let's face it, we can't even conceive of anything higher than 2-dimensional time because it's either forward or backwards, right? And stopping, and the present is wherever you stop. But if they're able to access any point along the timeline, that means that everything that ever has happened or ever will happen exists simultaneously, you know, and that's a tough one to get the old noodle around. But, you know, the best kind of image that I'm able to come up with in my head, because of course that's a theme that's popped up over and over and over again in all kinds of different stories, the idea of everything existing simultaneously. is the idea of every moment of all time, of all existence, being like one massive three-dimensional painting that you can, insert yourself into anywhere at any time. Other than that, I can't really, how do you wrap your head around that?
Well, we can't. I know I can't. So, with that said, that concludes this this podcast. We got one more, and that one's going to be near-death experience stories. There's going to be 3 of them. 2 of them are researched, and one of them is a user submission that came in just yesterday. So, we will get that one to you tomorrow. And again, if you, well, this podcast is dedicated to our fan who just passed away, Terry Acosta. And it's for that reason, actually. I'm not asking you guys to submit stories. I'm just kind of leaving it on that note. And we hope you'll tune in next time.
Good night, everybody.
Well, to a degree on the other side, but it takes much longer. So they explain the whole point of coming here as a great way to speed up that process. And by, as we grow spiritually, we can access different areas. Like they say, like there isn't 2 spots. There's not just heaven and hell like so many people think. There's many, many tiers and shades of in between. And just like all the physical properties in the world, our spirit vibrates at a certain frequency. And you may have heard people refer to negative entities as a lower vibrational frequency, and higher vibrational beings vibrating at a higher frequency. And you can only exist in a realm that is similar to your vibrational frequency. So if you're a negative person, when you die, you essentially go to a more negative place that's more in tune to your vibrational frequency. If you're a good person, you go the opposite way. So the idea is that we come here in hopes to advance ourselves so that when we do pass on, we can access those better places. And of course, the higher we go, the more positive it is, so we feel better. These things to them. And to put it bluntly, the point of life is said to be solely for the sake of soul growth. Nothing more, nothing less. Earth is a tough place, but it's tough on purpose. It's a boot camp. We come down here, we suffer, and in doing so, we learn new perspectives. And the whole concept is that, as we've spoken in other podcasts during this week, our body is kind of like a prison. It's a filter. It filters out our past memories, our past everything. So we come down here fresh, and when we do that, in only doing that, can we experience life without these biases and just really get a perspective on things. Like, for example, to learn what it's like to be someone who suffers through cancer. It's not enough for us to read about it. I've read about it. Anyone who hasn't had cancer has read about it. We know it's a terrible thing, but it's different than being someone who goes through it. So only can you get the exact perspective by experiencing it. And the whole idea, of course, our body being a prison, is that we speed up the process of soul growth, because they do say that you can grow your soul.
Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
just direct good vibrations towards his family. And yeah. And with that said, also, yeah, we'll just jump into the podcast from here. So this is on near-death experiences, and this particular episode is more on the elements of a near-death experience, what it consists of, commonalities and parallels that all people from all walks of life seem to experience. And the second part is going to be stories. In fact, there's two that I found that I wanted to share that were very interesting, very harrowing. And the third one is a user-submitted story that just came into me last night. So this episode is all on the elements of a near-death experience, and part 2 will be 3 stories of near-death experiences. And that will conclude our near-death experience week. So let's start with, one of the common questions that people have regarding near-death experiences. And that is what the point of life is. I mean, that's one of the questions everybody has. I mean, one of the ones that when people have near-death experiences, they hope to find out. And sometimes they have a guide or a dead relative or someone who explains. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we are continuing our near-death experience week. And before we jump into that, I do have something that I want to say. This, you may have recalled, we had a podcast with a gentleman by the name of Terry Acosta. It was on Native American cryptids. He had amazing stories there. Actually, I had noticed one day that he had submitted several very interesting stories, and it led me to contact him to, get him on the show, and he did, and he even had news stories for the show, and still one of my personal favorites. And I had learned today that Terry had just passed away, and he was an avid listener, great fan, and I'm saddened to hear it, and I'd just like to, basically say that we are dedicating this episode to Terry, and if any of you have any, well wishes or thoughts, you can drop them in the comments, or